for draft public places. Note we have media here with us, Max still, and Catherine's joined us. We opened the day with a karakia, so we're not going to have our karakia for each meeting through the day. As far as I know, we have not received apologies for today, which takes us to the report. And I'll come over to you, Kat and Dwayne.
Thank you. So the public places bylaw consultation was undertook using an SCP between the 26th of July and 27th of August. During that time, we had 35 submissions, and at the hearings, we had 3 people come to speak. Through the communications, we undertook early engagement prior to the consultation taking place, which helped to inform the drafting of the bylaw. We have various stakeholders with an interest in the terms of the bylaw, including those who registered their interest on Shape Tasman during the early engagement were identified and received an email notifying them of the consultation and encouraging them to make a submission. Some of those stakeholders included, but were not limited to, disability advocacy groups, the District Health Board, and organisations representing businesses such as Richmond Unlimited, Aotearoa Motueka, Golden Bay Promotion Association, and Mapuan Districts Business Association. Staff also met with Richmond Unlimited prior to the consultation to discuss the contents of the proposed bylaw. Following when the bylaw is made, there is a consultation. There is a communication plan to make sure that this is effectively communicated to the public. The bylaw will be notified publicly through Newsline and on the website on the 13th of December, but will come into force earlier than the 1st of February to enable time to just communicate any changes with the public. The consultation page on Shape Tasman will provide a summary and link to the newly made bylaw. Staff will identify the stakeholders again, and any submitters will receive an email directing them to that Shape Tasman page for more information about what has been adopted. There will be a media release, a media statement released along with social media comms to advise the wider public about the contents of the bylaw as well. The main themes that we received in the submissions were disability advocacy, particularly with regards to the sandwich board regulation. In reference to sandwich boards, there was also a desire for reduced visual clutter on our streets. There was also concern for the financial implications for businesses with regard to competition with mobile traders, the expense of outdoor dining licences to occupy public places, and potential revenue impacts if sandwich boards were prohibited. There was general support for the proposed smoke or vape-free discount in the outdoor dining section, and generally some support for the more permissive approach that this bylaw has taken, particularly around proposed rules for buskers and mobile traders. I'd like to draw your attention to a new resolution that we are tabling, which would be an amendment to clause 11.12. So this would now say, notwithstanding clause 11.3 and 11.4, sandwich boards must not obstruct or impact users of accessible parking. Notwithstanding clause 11.3 and 11.4, the council reserves the right to dictate the exact location for the placement of boards, prioritising pedestrian safety and convenience. And that clause is just, that addition to that clause has just been added there so that where it's not practical to have the sandwich board on the curbside edge, for instance, when it's a shared path that's maybe being shared with cyclists, for instance, we identified a potential location where it wouldn't work on Ellis Street in Brightwater, and we just want to be able to have a little bit more flexibility to tailor a solution that won't actually end up defeating the purpose of the bylaw and make sure that it's less hazardous to the public. Other than those themes that I identified earlier, I'm happy to take the rest of the report as read and work through any questions that you might have in relation to particular clauses or changes that we're proposing.
And thank you, Madam Chair. I might just add, so in terms of any tweaks, like suggesting the word radius or something like that into one of the clauses, I wondered if a good way to do it is if I try to keep a record of tweaks or changes that aren't in the resolutions you'd like to see, and then put a set of resolutions up to try and capture all of those once you've discussed them and get those moved and seconded that way.
I think it's helpful if that's not too onerous. Great. Thank you. We've got a resolution here with a number of parts to it, and it's over to you as panel members now for your comments, or is there anything you want clarified? You're pretty happy with it?
Yeah.
Councillor Dakey.
Thank you, Chair. Probably covered by 11.14 for the sandwich boards. We heard of perhaps areas in the district where the footpath might be narrower, where there could be individual cases of perhaps even council furniture reducing that width. Does 11.14 or any of the other clauses allow for council to use discretion in unusual circumstances where the footpath width may not be available, but existing sign usage, say Tākeka or other small areas? Is there anything in there that covers that off?
Through the chair, the discretion clause that we have added in there is more specific, and that it's referring to exemptions may be considered in cases such as businesses located down alleyways. So it's giving an example, but it's not necessarily giving an awful lot of leeway to apply to other circumstances as well. I'll just check the outdoor dining section. At the moment, there isn't a clause in the outdoor dining for that discretion to allow outside of what's been regulated in the bylaw.
Because, yeah, for my concern is still is that there could be very specific individual cases where the factors of the business may even be dictated by what council's done, e.g. rubbish bin, street furniture, whatever. And I do wonder again if that exemption clause in 11.14 or something similar could just be broadened, because we're allowing the exemption for a laneway in this case. I do wonder if it was slightly broader without opening the floodgates, then it might be useful.
So may I ask a question, Councillor? So there is a clause that Kat referred to earlier around notwithstanding clause 11.4, the council may ask that you put a sandwich board somewhere. And she gave an example of a shared path in Brightwater, but there are other instances where potentially it makes sense to put it next to street furniture, rubbish bins, signposts, or veranda posts. So we were thinking that rather than on the curb, in some cases it would make more sense. Is that the kind of situation you're contemplating?
Yes, if you feel that clause gives you the flexibility to use common sense in those scenarios, then that's fine. If you think the clause, and this applies to outdoor dining as well, because we know there's businesses that might just have a little table and chairs. And in that case, if you're going to say they can move the signboard next to the table and chairs because it's practical, well, then that would be fine. If you don't think that clause has enough width to cover those, then I think it may be open to expansion.
It may be worth considering the 1.8 that we've suggested. That's come not only from feedback that we received from Low Vision New Zealand, but it's also part of the NZTA RTS 14 guidelines that we have the 1.8 metres clearance for pedestrians, and they recommend that we don't go any narrower than 1.5. And so I guess it's just something that the panel might like to turn their minds to is if you do want to make exception clauses, to remember the intent of the bylaw and why those recommendations were being made. To consider what the purpose of that requirement was in the first place, and if you do actually want to create a situation where there wouldn't necessarily be that access for everybody.
I think so we've got a set of laws, we've defined compliance. 11.14 is an exemption to compliance, and then we've put 1.8 in there again as a provided it does not obstruct the footpath and maintains the 1.8. For me, I think if you remove the 1.8 in that clause, I would be much happier, because essentially the main rule you're going to breach is the 1.8, and then you put it in the exemption clause. Is that the way you read that?
The way I read the alleyway clause is that if let's say there's an alleyway, but people want to put their sandwich boards on the main street, they would still need to be able to provide 1.8 metres of clearance between one end of the edge of the street and the other, or between their sign and the edge of the street. So there is still a requirement to provide that level of clearance.
Maybe I'm not explaining it correctly, so try again.
Go.
If we've got a footpath to start with that's less than 1.8, are we just banning sandwich boards? If that's our intent, that's fine. If it's not, or there's individual cases where the footpath might narrow in, we've got street furniture, then we might want an exemption.
Through the chair, yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. And I think the purpose of having an exemption clause is so that discretion can be applied. And so if the direction is that you want to enable the council to be able to apply discretion below 1.8 metres, for example, then I think such an exemption clause would provide that flexibility, because there are going to be situations or widths where things are constrained. We know that, it just, to me, it makes sense to enable flexibility to achieve a balance between the outcomes. So if that's the direction, then I think that's very doable.
Through the chair, if you give us a moment, we might be able to draft up something to what is a new clause 11.2, which is the ability for council to direct but make it for the outdoor dining as well. So if you give me a moment, I can add that on. As long as everyone's comfortable with that, I can try and work on a resolution along those lines.
Okay, Councillor Mackenzie.
Yep. So, in terms of discretion or not, where have Nelson City landed in terms of their bylaw?
Through the chair, so they went out with a proposal to prohibit sandwich boards. We're talking sandwich boards, yes. And they had a bit of a mixed response, and ultimately they've landed where we have at the 1.8 metres clearance. And also they're changing over so that they will be consistent with us with having the signage on the curbside edges. That's what's been advocated for by the blind and low vision advocacy groups.
But what about in terms of giving discretion to actually not provide a 1.8 metre clearance, because that's where our conversation had gone. So does their bylaw give council discretion to not provide 1.8 metres?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I can look it up now.
Well, I think it's quite important that we have some kind of consistency, actually.
I'm just looking at Nelson City's latest publication, and it doesn't appear to give any exemption to the 1.8 metre standard. So that's, sorry, my initial read of their requirements is they've retained the 1.8 metre requirement. It says a sandwich board which reduces the width of the footpath available to pedestrians to less than 1.8 metres may not be displayed.
So, okay, so what are you, I mean, I'm just wondering, Glenn, what are you hoping to
Well,
achieve?
through this year, Nelson City doesn't have rural communities. So they grappled with, I think in their debate, they grappled with, say, Stoke versus, but obviously we've got a lot of smaller towns and the footpath isn't that wide to start with. So essentially this exemption would say, you know, no, there's no sandwich board outside your local dairy in Pahara or whatever, because say there's not enough room. Well, they'll be down to one, so they're already in trouble. But so it's thinking about those smaller areas. It's allowing common sense to occur to say, well, you know, is there any harm in it? You know, the footpath isn't 1.8 to start with, and you managed to put your sandwich board in a sensible place, and you can explain it to us. Is there any harm? You know, some of these places, foot traffic isn't that big to start with, so you know, it's just allowing how you might want to word it. So it's not the floodgates again. I think there is exemptions that we have that Nelson does not due to our rural community.
Thank you, through Chair. Yeah, I endorse where Councillor Dakey's coming from, and I don't think the blanket rule out for everybody to be the same actually gives kudos to the fact that we do have a rural community and that we aren't exactly the same as Nelson City Council with how wide and how the depth of all of our traders when you think that we're going to have to look after Murchison. Murchison is a valued part of the Tasman District Council, as is Collingwood. I think that whatever we're putting in, there needs to be discretion, there needs to be a scope that covers the common senseness of what Tasman District Council's area geography covers. And then I have another whole different topic, but are we waiting for?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold back on my next thing. Okay,
I've got some
thank
other different topics too.
Thank
And
you.
I think you're still on this.
Yeah, I am. So thank you. So just, Kat, I think you may have sent us the information. So, for example, across our district, where are the issues where we don't have footpaths greater than 1.8 metres?
Essentially, the issue is needing to have 2.4 because it's 1.8 clearance after you've put the sandwich board down as well. So there could be some issues in Edward Street and Wakefield. It depends where on the street you're looking at as to whether or not that would be permitted. For example, outside the pharmacy, because they've got that ramp coming down, that limits the width of their footpath. So that would pose a difficulty for them. Obviously, not every location throughout the district was measured, but we did in Murchison on the main streets. It was estimated about 3 metres. So that we're comfortable with where that's landed. Motueka at a couple of different places on the high street, 283 and 226 were 3.6 metres and 2.8 respectively. There were some difficulties with some locations in Takaka where it was reduced down to 2.2 metres wide in some instances. Some of this could be resolved through having one of the options that we consulted on was to have different requirements throughout the district. So, you know, for instance, you could say that in Takakura, the requirement would only be 1.5, which would be the minimum that we would be recommending in line with NZTA's advice. However, we've reflected that rather than having a separate requirement for, you know, going around each of the different towns, the requirement would simply have to be that it was a minimum of 1.5. However, it would still have to be on that curbside edge. So you're still giving as much as you possibly can. It wouldn't mean if you're down in Queen Street in Richmond that you would use that 1.5 and bang your sandwich board right in the middle of the path. You would still need to have it on the curbside edge, giving as much space as possible. But it is another option for you to consider.
Oh, okay, so in actual fact, I mean, there maybe is one or two circumstances where there's an issue, but fundamentally across the district, we're saying that it's not a problem in terms of the current width of the footpath. You give the example of the pharmacy in Wakefield. I mean, even that is kind of interesting because you sort of would wonder what would even be the value in having a sandwich board, to be honest, because they have a great big open sign and the thing that's highlighted. So, you know, I guess I don't have a problem in terms of giving officers some discretion, but we just need to make sure that it's worded, you know, properly. And
I think that, you know, if we're going to do, because we don't want to have a bylaw, then we sort of chip away at the basis of it in a way. So we want to have something fairly standard and solid. And actually what we're describing, I think, here is just some exceptional circumstances. And so if the discretion is being applied to very few places, you know, that's quite a bit different than, you know, open the door and people can all say, oh, I'd like to put it here and put it there. As long as it really is just addressing the very few businesses in the district where it's actually not achievable for them, is my thought. You've got something further, Councillor?
Just to mention again, so we've heard the exemption actually by definition would be for very few places because everywhere else is compliant with the width. Where it really hits also is that street furniture for outdoor dining. You might have a very small footpath and you might have some existing chairs that you've fundamentally had for many years, and having those seats on the footpath now may put you in breach, and that could be a vital part of your bakery or cafe, and it could just be that rare occasion where we don't want to say to people, well, actually you're losing your seats out the front because we, you know, this wasn't the intention of it, you know, and they might be in 1.7, they might be in 1.6, and we say, well, actually you should still be able to sit seats out the front because you always have, and you've still got plenty of clearway. And that's that rare occasion that we can't see where staff could then use common sense. So it's also outdoor dining.
Through the chair, I've discussed it with Jamie here, and I've got a potential, if you want to go down this route, a potential clause to consider. I wonder if I should just read out the wording. Agrees to start amending wording in the following clauses in the draft public places bylaw. New clause 12.7 to enable staff to agree an exemption to the outdoor dining width of 1.8 metres in isolated sections of a path where there are constraints such as street furniture poles or rubbish bins or a narrow section of path. And I've added here for your consideration that outdoor dining is a fundamental part of a business or something along those lines, because it's not meant to be just a giveaway, and if we make it too broad, it undermines the whole thing. So that's off the top of the head suggested wording for such a clause.
We appear to be nodding. And we've got a bit of time yet, so it might just be good just to come back to that, just to sit with it a wee bit. And I mean, it sounds, first go around, it sounds like it would address what your concerns are. Anything further on this particularly? Yes.
If we're on sandwich boards, 11.10, it says sandwich boards must be brought into private property outside business hours. I did wonder, it's only a small point, but I did wonder if we wanted to put sandwich boards and base must be brought in. I've noticed a lot of vendors tend to bring the board in but leave the base on the street, and at night it's a bit of a trip hazard. So I wondered if adding boards and base in there might clarify that you've got to bring both in. It's sort of implied, but it's not done.
through the chair, look, I might add that to my list of minor clarifications to pop up later for you to consider. So yeah, cool.
Anything further on this area? So other, Councillor Walker, you've got some other matters to raise?
Yeah, thank you through your chair. So the next one that I want to raise is around your mobile traders. And that is 5.24 staff advice around the 200 metres from a fixed business selling similar goods. Again, I have a problem with that being a blanket rule right through the district. The 200 metres here may work in the CBD of Richmond, but the implications of that in other parts of our or other wards. And currently it says the bylaw already addresses this by requiring mobile traders to operate at least 200 metres. But what's the 200 metres and where are you measuring that from?
Through the chair, it was meant to be as a crow fly, so 200 metres in either direction in a straight line. And this is when I contemplated identifying a clarifying resolution along the lines that's a 200 metre within a 200 metre radius of the fixed premises. And I was hoping that would make it clear enough.
I like that you're adding in the word radius, but I still struggle with the 200 as a blanket right through.
Thank you. What are Nelson doing in this area? Do we know?
Not off the top of our heads, I'm sorry. Not from anyone.
It may be worth noting that there is 7.3 in the bylaw. If the mobile trading activity is not permitted under the terms of in 7.1, written permission of the council is required before it goes ahead.
Okay.
So there is that possibility for exemptions within that 200 metres as well. However, the panel may be interested in discussing reducing that radius as well.
And we haven't based the 200 metres on anything very specific other than it seems like that's far enough away.
Well, yeah, through the chair, there's no particular science to it other than it's a 3 to 5 minute walk. So that was the kind of idea, and it'll probably be out of sight. And acknowledge, as I think when we proposed it, that you could make a different determination, and there isn't necessarily a hard science that gives you a right or wrong answer.
And Kat helpfully just showed us as we were chatting before the meeting on the GIS a radius of 200 metres from somewhere, and actually it would put mobile traders well outside the sort of more commercial area here. To me, it's quite a long way, and yeah. I understand the point of it, and that, you know, people are paying commercial rates and they've got to let resource they put into bricks and mortar and maintaining that, and having a permanent contribution and, you know, to the town. But I'm interested if any panel members have got any bids on 200. Councillor Dakey.
Where would you start, Eva? The exemption clause, so it says, unless written permission of the council is required. So if I'm a business mobile trader and I want to go under 200, I'd have to write to council. What would the decision process be behind the staff? Because surely it would be that's where it gets a benefit, because I'm going to apply the judgment method would really be, that's the only reason I could see reducing it, is that you might end up with a lot of scenarios where you're going to have to make staff are going to be forced to make a judgment call on that business. Whereas if you bring it down a little bit, it might reduce that. But
there isn't currently a policy that I'm aware of in place to deal with that particular type of discretion. It is managed in different circumstances, such as with the commercial services. That's a formalised agreement. It's a contract between council and not a mobile trader, but say someone who's set up a permanent coffee cart. And those instances are, where they are, I guess, in direct competition with a fixed business, it gets taken into account in the decision, but there's not necessarily someone else may on staff may disagree with me on this, but to my knowledge, there isn't any set criteria that they have to meet in order to do that.
It's not hard to imagine, if we use the ugly dog out here as an example, it's not hard to imagine that you could have a mobile trader within 200 metres radius, but they're actually down the road and along some little what's it, and then there a little bit, and they're actually they're not an obvious, there's not an obvious competition somehow. Where people wandering around that part of town thinking, oh, look, I'll go there instead of walking all the way to the ugly dog. So it's a bit arbitrary, isn't it? And my feeling is to want to reduce the distance, actually. I think it's quite a long way. And if we look at Takaka, I don't know how long our main street is, Jamie probably knows, but you'd be a fair way down down the road to get away from a coffee shop or a cafe. Yeah. There are no suggestions coming forward particularly, but I wonder if 100 metres would be sufficient.
Oh, look, as I acknowledge, it's a judgment call, so happy to take the guidance of the hearings panel. I've drafted a quick resolution to change the limit, and I've put in 100 as a holding space for now and clarified it's a radius.
Do we have any?
Go.
So on this particular clause, did we have any submissions on this particular aspect?
There were a couple of submissions off the top of my head. I'm just going to go through the report and confirm. But there were a couple from fixed businesses concerned about competition. In my discussions with the property team, their observation is that mobile traders aren't particularly prevalent, and it's incredibly difficult to turn a profit and to keep that kind of business going. And so they were generally in favour of reducing those barriers to them. But yeah, we just do acknowledge that there are a couple of concerns from the fixed businesses. It's been in the media a little bit in the past as well. More recently in Christchurch, the folks at Riverside Market were not particularly happy about a proposed food truck setup that was going up nearby. But there was also an argument that it was catering to a different clientele. And it wasn't necessarily direct competition. If you have a cafe, you have premises where people can come and sit down. You're not going to be able to offer that necessarily if you have a food truck either. So, yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering about a process issue. So we put out the draft bylaw with the 200 metres. We've had no submissions from mobile traders indicating that they think it's excessive. We've had some submissions from businesses worried about the impact on their business. So where does that leave us in terms of deciding based on no information from mobile traders to actually cut it back?
Through the chair, I guess a couple of points. The first is I think it's probably one of the general points is that when you pull back from a regulation, it's more when you're deliberating, it's more acceptable than trying to create a new regulation or a new imposition on people. Notwithstanding submissions or no submissions. The second one is at the moment there are no regulations at all on this, so something is better than nothing, and you can turn your mind to it, particularly if it's kind of more of a minor nature change. And I think, to be honest, I know 100 and 200 might seem material, but in the scheme of the bylaw, it's probably not that material. And the other thing is, full council approved this for consultation. And you've been tasked as the hearing panel to turn your mind to the bylaw, including things that come up in submission. So I think you have enough scope to make this kind of a change. if it was the other way around and you're proposing a new regulation or expanding significantly the boundary, then I would have some concerns then. Sorry, finally, it's also, I think, suggests it's probably low risk.
Any follow up there, councillor? You're not looking very convinced.
Well, no, I mean, look, I guess, accept that we can change our mind. The question is, if you're less than the 200 metres, then it doesn't become a permitted activity. So you will have to just go through a process which may or may not get approval for it.
So you're inclined to stay with the 200 metres, is that the case?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask each of you, I think, so that we can get clear with us. And
I'd like to see it changed to 100.
I'm happy with the status quo because of the 7.3 clause in there, which gives us a written exemption. And I had to tend to agree with Christine, and that was we didn't hear anyone advocating for it to be lower, or we heard some people advocating in reality for it to stay as we've gone out with at least. So yeah, I guess I'm happy with it at 200 when I've reflected on it.
And hence we have 4 panel members, not 5. Okay, any other matters to be raised? I've just got a question. I asked Jamie during the week about just where the public footpath business boundary line was in Takaka, and I was been assuming that the line would have gone to sort of where the building wall is, and then they've got a veranda. But actually, it looks as though actually it's at the edge of the veranda in some places. Is that correct? Did I read that right?
Yeah, your interpretation of the boundaries from the aerial photographs are correct. It does seem to vary. Some of the verandas extend over road reserve, and other verandas finish at the road reserve, so have some section of footpath or area on private property where businesses might have put their own tables and chairs on their own property. So that would be not covered by this bylaw.
Yes,
Yep.
That's my question. So where the if their business, if their boundary is here's the wall and then there's the veranda, they can actually put what they like in that space.
That's correct, and there are even some shop frontages in Queen Street and in High Street where a part of the front of the shop front, either the window or the wall, is actually stepped back from the boundary. So those businesses are free to put their own stand, chair, flag, whatever they want on their own property. Yep.
Retail display.
That's right. So, but I mean, those conversations get teased out, I guess, through normal business, and I think what staff try and do is have the right conversation with businesses about how they're using, even if it's their own space. We can point out perhaps that that's creating a challenge for certain people in our community, but we can't control it per se using the bylaw.
So there'll be in some towns, there'll be some inconsistency. As people wander down the street, they'll see that there's no retail displays on most of it, and then all the shop is and can, or there aren't flags, but there's a couple here. And I guess people who've got the businesses in town will get to know where their boundaries are and what they're able to do and what they're not, and they'll convey that to their neighbours perhaps. So just noticing that there's going to be some, there's not going to be a standard thing going on down the street based on those boundaries. Thank you. So nothing further from panel members? So in terms of our resolution, could we just come back to, could you read again, Dwayne, please, your proposal in terms of the
through you, Madam Chair. So I was going to suggest, and I'll send this in a moment. In fact, maybe I should do that while I'm talking to it. 3 amending resolutions. One, agrees to staff amending wording in the following clauses in the draft public places bylaw. 4.1, new clause to 12.7. New clause, 12.7, to enable staff to agree an exemption to the outdoor dining width of 1.8 metres in isolated sections of a path where there are constraints such as street furniture poles or rubbish bins or a narrow section of path, and outdoor dining is a fundamental part of the business. The next change was clarify that sandwich boards include the base, and that clause 11.10 applies to the base also. That was the suggestion around moving it indoors at night. Clause 7.1f to clarify the limit to be within 200-metre radius of a fixed premises selling similar products. So the key thing there was the 200 remains the same, but we're clarifying it's a radius. And that's all the changes so far I've got.
Yes, yeah, that's okay. We'll just take a couple of minutes to have that come through.
While you're doing that, Madam Chair, I might just ask that the clause that Kat mentioned this morning be changed around notwithstanding sections 11.3 and 11.8. Oh, sorry, 11.4. Probably need to give effect to what Councillor Dykey was talking about around, giving the ability for staff to allow sandwich boards some latitude. We probably need to just mention in there 11.4 and 11.5, please. So that will give staff the ability to talk to someone on the street and say, look, sandwich board doesn't make sense here. Maybe it could be over here next to this veranda pole, for example, the kind of thing you're referring to.
In terms of somebody wanting to have some discretion applied, because they're in an unusual little narrow spot or something, what would the process be? Is it going to be as simple as write an email?
It's likely to be reactive. So a sandwich board will appear, and either someone will say they're having difficulty with it, or staff may notice that it's constraining width, and that would initiate a conversation, and which might result in an exemption being agreed to.
Yeah, and if somebody knows that they need to get an exemption because it's just not going to work, what's the process that they would follow?
They would just contact council in some way.
Yeah,
we've got various ways of being contacted.
Yes.
Yep.
And then we're just gonna, anyway, I just want you to know it's a very simple, easy sort of process, and there's not going to be some fee involved. And
no, we're quite easy to deal with, I think.
Yes, very good. I find you pretty easy to deal with. So perhaps have a read of that, panel members, and just see that you're satisfied with it. Question. Yes.
I'm just wondering in the wording, Dwayne, whether where it says where outdoor dining is a fundamental part of the business, I'm just wondering whether that adds anything to the sentence, because actually, how do you determine what is a fundamental part of the business? I mean, I think all it's saying is that actually there can be an exemption connected to street furniture poles or rubbish bins or the path narrow. But why? But to go on and say where outdoor dining is a fundamental part of the business, to me, actually doesn't add anything. In fact, just raises more questions in terms of how do you determine that. So Well, my suggestion would be that you could just delete that. But interested in your view.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, I making it up policy on the fly is always a bit fraught, but I was thinking it potentially puts us in a position of trying to determine what's fundamental to business. What I was thinking, I'll give you an example, and that might clarify whether you think it adds any value. I was trying to think of if it's a cafe or a restaurant or something like that. Clearly, it's going to be fundamental part of the business. What I was thinking of is a dairy, and whether a dairy needs some chairs and dining out, that sort of thing outdoors. But as soon as you started saying that, I started thinking about Upper Queen Street and the fact that we have in fact constructed outdoor dining for the Upper Queen Street dairy. So, maybe you just leave it out and accept that people who are going to request an exemption are already fundamentally in the business of serving food. I acknowledge your point, in short.
Inclined to agree. What's lost if it's taken out?
Probably very little outside of someone trying to be difficult, and that's probably boxing the shadows.
Okay. Is there anything further from panel members? And I am looking for somebody to move and second the resolution. Moved by Councillor Mackenzie. Thank you. Second by Councillor Dakey. Just nothing further, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Oh, and we've got some minutes. Thank you. Some minutes to confirm from the meeting on the hearing meeting on the 23rd of September. Somebody happy to move the minutes be accepted?
Yep.
Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Dakey, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. If there's no further business, thank you very much for the work that's gone into this and the way that you presented that information to us for today, particularly the amended resolutions. It makes it a lot easier for us to keep a track of those things. So thank you very much. That brings our meeting to a close. And for those involved with cats, we'll be here at 1:30.
Yeah.
Thank you.